The first scream wasn't a scream at all, more like a tiny, broken sound her son made when hunger twisted inside him. A dry, quiet whimper that stabbed deeper than any shout ever could, and Mara pressed her hand over her mouth to stop herself from making one of her own. 5 days. 5 days without a real meal. 5 days of lying to him that food was coming, that someone would help, that winter wouldn't swallow them whole. And now, as the sun bled out behind the jagged hills, the shack they rented shuddered, in the wind like it was preparing to collapse and bury all their promises with it. She tucked an old jacket around the boy, wishing it were thicker, wishing she were stronger, wishing the world weren't cruel enough to forget people like them. Eli's lips had gone pale, his eyes glassy, and Mara kept waking him every few minutes because she was terrified that if she let him sleep too long, he might not open his eyes again. She whispered stories to distract him, stories of warm houses and hot soup and fireplaces where no wind could get in. He didn't respond anymore. He was too tired, too empty. The landlord had kicked them out of their last room because she couldn't pay, because she'd trusted the wrong man 2 years ago, because debts had teeth and people had none. She rocked Eli against her shoulder, trying not to cry because tears wouldn't feed him. Snow had started drifting across the doorframe, sliding inside through the broken. Seemed like the world wanted to freeze them into statues. She had 1 can of beans left, but it was dented and rotten, and Eli had thrown up the last time she tried to make him eat it. She had nothing. She had no one. Except, she forced herself to stop that thought because thinking it hurt too much. Because believing in him again was like stepping onto a frozen river and pretending it wouldn't crack. But when wind rattled the boards like bones, a different sound suddenly pushed through. Heavy boots on frozen ground. At first she panicked. She thought maybe the landlord had come back to throw them out of even this miserable place. She clutched Eli and backed into the corner, her pulse hammering against her skull. Then came a knock, slow, not angry, not rushed. A knock that somehow felt familiar even through the storm. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. When the door opened anyway, because the lock was broken and resistance didn't matter, she saw him framed in the wind and blowing snow. Cade Thatcher, the rancher she once loved, the one she left because she believed she wasn't enough for his world, his wealth, his expectations, the man whose jaw now clenched when he saw her, whose eyes darkened when they fell on the limp child against her chest. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him, blocking the storm like he could block the world itself. The room felt full of him, his silence, his strength, his anger simmering like a pot, about to boil. The smell of hay and leather clung to him, the same smell she used to fall asleep against when life still made sense. She wanted to hide her face, her shame, her failure, but she couldn't move. Cade's voice was low, rough as gravel. How long? She didn't answer. But Eli groaned faintly in her arms, and that was the answer. Cade's jaw flexed like it hurt him to breathe. When's the last time he ate? The words scraped out of him like they'd been dragged through fire. She forced air into her lungs. 5 days. He tried, but he can't keep anything down. Her voice cracked and crumbled. I'm trying, Cade, I swear I'm trying. She stopped because her throat closed. Because the truth was bitter and humiliating. Because she hadn't wanted him to find her like this. Cade's eyes flicked to the rotted can on the floor, then to the cracked walls, the frayed blankets, the blue tint in Eli's fingertips. Something dangerous sparked across his features. Something that frightened her. Not because he would hurt her, but because she had never seen him look this furious at anything in his life. He crouched in front of her, big, warm hands closing gently around Eli's frail arm. His voice softened. Hey, little man, he said softly. You're gonna be okay. I promise you. Eli barely blinked. Cade stood suddenly, towering, decisive. Get up, Mara startled. Cade, wait. Pack your things, he said, each word a thunderbolt. You're coming home. She almost dropped Eli as the shock punched through her. She shook her head, backing away instinctively. No, we can't. I can't go back there. Cade, your ranch, your family? My house, he corrected sharply. My decisions. She swallowed. They'll think, let them. His voice was a low growl. Let the whole damn county talk. They can choke on their opinions. I'm not leaving you two in this place another minute. Her chest tightened, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Cade, please. I don't want your pity. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unflinching. "This isn't pity," he said, voice steady as earth. "This is what should have happened the day you walked away. I should have gone after you. I'm not making that mistake. Twice." She trembled because she remembered that day too well. The argument about expectations. Her fear of not fitting into his world. Her running before he could watch her fail. And now here he was, refusing to let her fall any further. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around Eli, tucking the collar under the boy's chin. Eli's small face peeked out, half hidden in warmth. Cade lifted him with one arm like he weighed nothing. "He needs a doctor tonight," he said. "Food, heat, rest. And you—" His gaze swept over her torn shoes and shaking fingers. "You need all that too." She felt the words hit. Places inside her she had sealed shut. She gathered the few belongings she had. A threadbare blanket, a worn photo of Eli, a cracked cup, and stuffed them into a sack. Cade didn't hurry her, but every muscle in his body was coiled tight, like he was holding himself together by threads. When she stepped outside, the wind sliced through her clothes, but Cade shielded her with his body, guiding her toward his truck. She had ridden in that truck 100 times before, laughing, touching his arm, dreaming. Tonight she felt like an intruder in her own memories. Inside, the heater blasted warm air. Cade settled Eli between them, keeping a protective hand on the boy's back. The drive was silent except for Eli's small, shallow breaths. Mara stared at him, afraid each one might be the last. Cade reached over and touched her knee, a quiet reassurance. "He's gonna make it," he said firmly. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. When they reached the ranch, lights glowed from every window like beacons. Cade carried Eli inside and shouted for the housekeeper to prepare hot water. Broth, blankets, people scrambled. No one questioned. No one whispered. Mara stood frozen at the doorway until Cade came back, grabbed her wrist gently and pulled her inside the warmth. "You stay here," he said. "You're safe now." She felt her knees weaken at the words. She didn't remember falling asleep. She only remembered the crushing weight of exhaustion lifting for the first time in months, the warmth of soft blankets, the distant murmur of Cade's voice. "Speaking to the doctor?" He'd called in the middle of the night. When Mara awoke, pale morning light filtered through the curtains, and for a heartbeat she thought she was dreaming. Real blankets. A fire crackling faintly beyond the door, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. She sat up quickly, panic snapping her awake. Eli, she stumbled to her feet and rushed, barefoot into the hallway. Cade was sitting in a chair beside the bedroom where they'd placed Eli, elbows on his knees, head bowed like he'd been holding vigil all night. When he heard her, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were tired, rimmed red but steady. "He ate," Cade said quietly. Her breath hitched so hard she had to clutch the wall. "He ate?" "Half a bowl of broth," he said. Kept it down, too. Tears welled before she could stop them. She pressed her hand to her mouth. As sobs rose from a place so deep she didn't know it existed, Cade stood and caught her before she fell, pulling her into his chest. She cried until her throat burned and her whole body shook. He didn't say a word, just held her solid and warm, like an anchor in a storm she'd been drowning in alone. When she finally calmed, he brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You're safe here," he repeated softly. "Both of you." She didn't realize she had leaned into his touch until he gently tilted her chin up. "Mara," he murmured, "who did this to you?" She stiffened, pulling back slightly. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He hesitated, then looked away. "The man I trusted. He left when he learned I was pregnant. Took everything I had, money, work, reputation. I couldn't stay in town. Everyone talked. Everyone judged. I didn't want to drag you into that." Cade's jaw tensed. "You think I'd care? About the gossip of people who weren't brave enough to help you?" She swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I didn't know how to ask." Cade exhaled slowly, stepping closer. "If you had called once, if you had sent a letter, left a message. Hell, if you had whispered my name into the wind, I would have found you." Her heart twisted painfully. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I didn't want you to see what I'd become." Cade's eyes softened, fierce and tender at the same time. "You're still the strongest woman I've ever known." She opened her mouth to argue, but a small voice interrupted. "Mama?" Eli's voice, weak but clear. Mara rushed into the room and fell to her knees beside the bed. Eli blinked up at her, cheeks slightly less hollow, lips less pale. "Mama, it's warm," he said softly. "And I had soup." Her vision blurred. She kissed his forehead again and again. Cade stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching with an expression that looked dangerously close to something like hope. Over the next days, Eli gained strength. Mara helped in the kitchen, trying to repay a debt she knew she never could. Cade never pushed, never pressured, but he was always near, fixing the barn door, chopping wood, brushing the horses, and somehow always within her sight. Every night he checked on Eli. Every morning he made sure Mara had eaten. And slowly, something old and familiar began knitting itself back together between them. One evening, after Eli fell asleep with a full stomach for the first time in months, Mara stepped outside onto the porch to breathe the cold night air. Cade was already there, leaning against the railing, watching the stars stretch across the sky. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the cold wasn't what made her shiver. He glanced at her. "You look better," he said. "Stronger," she smiled faintly. "That's because you helped us." Cade turned fully toward her. "I didn't help you," he corrected quietly. "I brought you home." The words sent a tremor through her chest. She looked away, heart pounding. "Cade, you can't mean that." He stepped closer, voice low. "I do. I've meant it for years. I never stopped wanting you. Mara, I never stopped looking." She swallowed hard. "But I'm not the woman you remember." "Good," he said, surprising her. "Because the woman I remember ran. This one fought to keep her child alive with nothing but willpower and grit. She's stronger, braver, and she doesn't have to run anymore." Her breath shook as she met his eyes. They burned with something that made her chest ache. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying stay. Not because you owe me anything. Not because you're trapped. But because I want you here. Because I want to take care of both of you. Because I want you to want that too." A tear slid down her cheek. "Cade, I'm scared." He reached for her hand, intertwined their fingers. "Then be scared with me. Just don't leave again." She let the silence settle between them like falling snow. Then she squeezed his hand back. "I won't." He pulled her gently into his arms, and she rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, warm, unyielding. It felt like standing inside a promise. Inside, Eli stirred and murmured in his sleep, but he no longer sounded hungry or hurting. The house was warm, safe, alive. For the first time in a long time, so was she. Cade kissed her hair softly. "Welcome home, Mara." And this time she didn't flinch from the word. She breathed it in, deep, fearless, whole, because finally, unbelievably, it was true.